Hi everyone, it's me, Jen Sear again. I am a moderator on this Facebook page and I am happy to share with you my best answers for our burning questions for this week. This is part 2 where I will discuss co-articulation, etymology, and one random question about sound vowels. I'm using Google Slides for this presentation. All right. So co-articulation, which I normally would not hyphenate here, affects our phonemes. Think about our short vowel a in apple. Okay, that is what we would consider the kind of original phoneme for a. A says a. However, what happens when you take a and you surround it by other consonants is the quality of the vowel is affected by the consonants that surround us. So that explains the pronunciation of the a phoneme in words like man, where the a is followed by an n, and that sound travels up the nose and it becomes nasalized. And so instead of sounding like a, it sounds more like eh. Right? Another example of co-articulation is what happens when a follows w. Right? If you think about the sound wa, the a becomes more rounded and it sounds more like, what we would think of as a short o. So we have wa where this happens, and then it shifts again, or shifts in a similar way when the a precedes the phoneme o. Okay, and it sounds more like aw, as in fall or almost. All right, so all of this is co-articulation, and I will speak to how we instruct to that in just a minute. We have a specific question about the word bok. So if you think about bok, tuck, and chalk, okay, we have the a, which precedes the l, which is we would consider a liquid sound. So it really does affect the phonemes around it. But when you travel from the b to the k, right, that open sound forces your mouth to shift in such a way that the ul phoneme just kind of disappears in those words, right? One more example is our R-controlled vowels. So we have a word like car, where the quality of the A changes so dramatically that we consider R-controlled vowels to be their own phoneme type, right? And when we represent that as a phoneme grapheme, we know that there really is kind of this distorted vowel attached to the R, but it is such a distinction that we keep the two letters together and consider it one phoneme for our instruction, right? Co-articulation can help explain kids' spelling errors. So I want you to think for a second about the word train. Okay, we know by looking at the word that the phonemes are t, a, n. Okay, however, when I co-articulate those sounds together, something funny happens. It's a co-articulation that we call affrication. Okay, so when I pronounce it, it's just train, and the first phoneme my mouth produces is really ch. Okay, so this affrication of that consonant can account for why some kids spell train with a ch or ch. Okay, something happens with spider, right, where it's got the unvoiced consonant following the s, and when I co-articulate, it comes out voiced because it's preceding a vowel, and vowel is voiced. So, the human brain and mouth are taking shortcuts, and it's pronounced as spider. So if they spell it S-B-I-D-E-R, that's not really a big mystery. Kids who do this are not really showing deficiency in phonemic awareness. They are requiring instruction in spelling and in phonics. We had specific questions about R-controlled vowels. So I want to preface this by saying that a lot of this has to do with co-articulation, and we have to teach these patterns directly. So if you think about R, or, right? We want kids to be familiar with them because they are really prevalent in our language. There's a lot of our control vowels in our words. So our strategies are that we teach them to strategize based on frequency of the appearance of the grapheme. And we ask kids to be aware of them and to apply them flexibly. And then after they've built up practice and experience, we allow them to estimate their best guess, but provide them with the opportunity to use tools for checking their work. We had a specific question about wa, as in wash, and that relates to the wa sound in squash, all right? It's just a co-articulation. And so we've kind of gone into that. But programs like the ones I use, okay, like Foundations, Inspire, will teach these as welded or glued units. So rather than having to recognize that ink is I, k, but the is represented by an N, we simplify it. We just teach them that I and K says ink, and they memorize it and practice it, and the load on their phonological processor is decreased a little bit there. When I phoneme grapheme map these, though, I always give each phoneme its own box. We have a scope and sequence that we teach by, and as kids encounter words that are beyond our scope and sequence, we may choose to treat words with those patterns as heart words. So this doesn't mean they're irregular. These words follow predictable patterns, but we treat them as heart words so that kids can wrap their heads around them and utilize them right away. Basically, we teach them how to sound out the word, and we identify the part they haven't learned yet by placing a heart over it. The same way we would put a heart over a new regular spelling within a phonemically decodable word. Okay, we had another question about consonant LE syllables. Now, I would like to say that next week's burning questions will be all about syllables and syllable types. However, we kind of talk about this, understanding that final stable syllable is usually 3 graphemes. And so I love to syllabicate these because syllabication and syllable identification is super easy. You take your word and remove all suffixes, and then you start at the E and count back 3 letters, and that generates your final stable syllable, which you read with a schwa bool in this word stable. Then you consider the letters that are left and you identify the syllable type. So in the case of stable, stay is open. And then I have my consonant LE syllable. Considering the word pebble, right? I start at the E, count back 3. There's my bool. But then what's left is a nice, lovely closed syllable. That's why you see doubling in words with consonant LE so that you can maintain your closed syllable. All right, and that works with things that have digraphs, right? You wouldn't have to double anything that has a digraph because you already have 2 consonants in place. All right, here's an example of a final stable syllable featuring a digraph team, beagle, and one with an OR control vowel, hurdle, right? And what we want to do is have kids separate the final stable syllable and then become really good at identifying what the initial syllable is before we get into adding suffixes and crazy business like that. All right, we had a specific question about the word mirror and how to explain its phonology. So sometimes, we cannot use phonology to explain all of our words. Mirror comes from French, right? And so in French, the letter I often represents the sound E, and when you place it in front of an R, it sounds like mirror as opposed to murmur, which would be impossible to say, right? Murmur, juror, murmur, it's messy. So it's much prettier to be able to keep the French vowel and to say mirror. Mirage is a relative of mirror, except this word comes from Arabic. There's a really great site, etymology online, where you can look up origins of words. I would say that understanding etymology for most students comes much later in the scope and sequence, so it's good for you to know and to be able to explain it, but I would expect that students in 3rd, 4th grade can start to really dig into it. Okay, I used some examples of French words on this slide, thinking about the word livre, right, for book, or pièce de résistance. You can see that the I does often take on the long E sound. We had a very specific question about the difference in the O phoneme in the words both, bother, and brother. So I did have to look this one up because all 3 of these words really originate from Old English. Bother originates from Irish English, and if you think about bother, that's the one that's the most phonetically regular, right? You can say the phonemes b, a, th, and you can spell that based on its phonemic sequence, no problem. If you think about brother, well, that follows an R. We already talked about how R complicates things, right? Co-articulation following an R can sometimes be tricky. Maybe not as tricky as preceding an R, but you're with me. Both originated from ancient, English. However, usually it connotated a phrase, both the, and change that to a short O, and you get both the, which is just awkward to say. So I really feel like this was a shortcut humans took with articulation to make our speech more efficient, and I would probably teach this as a heart word or an exception. We teach kind, old, wild words as closed syllable exceptions. There really aren't enough words that follow the both pattern to teach as a whole unit, but you could throw it in there as a heart word. All right, one final question is that someone asked why the tools for reading word wall materials didn't contain all of the phonemes. So here is an image of my poster that I use. Now, I don't work for this company. I do use their tools. I find that it supports a number of the materials that I do choose to use in class, so I think this is great. There are 44 phonemes in our language, so I did a little survey here, and there are 46 sound cards here, okay? 44 for our phonemes, plus an additional card for schwa, right, representing a and I, and an additional card for k, because of the frequency where you can see k as a C and k as a K. So I actually think this program did a really excellent job of explaining the phonemes, and I think that the tool and the color coding contained is super handy. So I will note that in the materials that you can buy these student desk cards, those desk cards do not contain all of the phonemes. But instructionally, this makes sense for me because when you're using desk cards, you're usually talking about very young children, and very young children probably wouldn't be learning to spell words with all of these phonemes. They would use, probably the top 40 most of the time. Maybe getting into vowel teams in a very good year. All right. Next week, my fellow moderators will be presenting on syllables and syllable types. And so if you feel like you could use more professional knowledge in this area, I recommend that you tune in. I know I went extremely fast tonight. However, most of what I learned and what I presented to you can be found online with a little Google search. Also, if you have specific questions, you can add more questions to the burning questions, or you could post basic, simple questions in the comments here, and I'll be happy to respond. I hope that you found this informative. It was sure fun preparing for it. I'll see you guys soon. Keep up the good work. Bye.